All right, hey, what's going on? It's another episode of Film Streak. My name is Rob, here to watch some new movies, here to talk about some new things. And it's 2025. So I want to talk about some new movies that are kind of leftovers from 2024. I did an episode talking about some of the movies that didn't really fit into other episodes, I guess. They didn't really have a lot of things in common. But here, right at the very end of the year, I did find a sort of a group of films that I thought would make sense. And so I want to talk about some of these. These are films that, in some way or another, I think are trying to get at the theme of we have female characters, or at least women as a whole, and their struggle with age and perception, especially in a sort of I don't know, a celebrity type of situation, right? So the first film I want to talk about here isn't quite the one that I really want to get to. I'll save that for a minute from now. But I saw this documentary called You Don't Nomi, and it's You Don't Nomi. Now, if you don't know what this documentary is, it's a documentary about not just the making of, but I guess the sort of after effects, the legacy of the film Showgirls, right? It's a Paul Verhoeven film from, was that like 95, 96, somewhere in there. And, at the time, I remember it being a pretty big deal because it was rated NC-17. And I actually worked, it was one of my first jobs. I worked at a movie theater when this movie came out. And I remember thinking like, oh, how are we going to do this? Are we even going to show this movie here? Because it was one of those that, at the time for movie theaters, there was there was a line that was being drawn in terms of the types of films that were being shown. And so I remember that film being shown. It was shown in one theater, and it was shown only in the evenings or late in the day, like the 10 o'clock shows or whatever. And it was a thing where we had to kind of post someone at the door to make sure kids didn't get into the theater. And I said, well, I mean, what is the deal with this movie? I mean, it's Paul Verhoeven. So I remember at the time, like there was Total Recall, there was RoboCop, Starship Troopers. But then with Basic Instinct, I think you kind of saw like, oh, this filmmaker, if you followed it enough, you realize, okay, this guy, he follows his own rules. And he kind of doesn't have the same sensibilities as maybe an American filmmaker in terms of what he can or can't or should or shouldn't show us on screen. And in a way that was cool, that was interesting, it was challenging. But at the same time, it's like you could see where, okay, well, a film called Showgirls and is about this sort of seedy side of Las Vegas and all that. I was like, well, what is this going to be? Is this going to be violent? Is this going to be like just gratuitous? And turned out it was kind of a little bit of everything, and also not that great, right? I remember watching it and I thought, well, I get the idea here, but I feel like it's so overwrought and entirely gratuitous. And it was only many years later that I saw that, oh, there's been a change in the way people come at this film, right? Like they don't come at it seriously. They don't come at it as any sort of like a dramatic exercise. It's more of like, this is camp. This is tongue in cheek. It's ironic. And this documentary, You Don't Nomi, it goes into the whole thing. It goes into the sort of the beginnings, the origins of the film, of how it got made, and some of the, I guess, the drama behind the scenes. There was a lot going on with the production and the sort of perception of the production. And then once the film actually landed, and the reception and how it was just, roasted for being what it was. And then even the documentary even goes into how it changed, how all that kind of got twisted around over time to the point where it's now sort of celebrated in certain circles, I guess. And it doesn't change the film itself, of course. Like the film is what it is. It hasn't gotten better or hasn't sort of changed in terms of its quality. I think it's just a matter of like what people see in it now. And look, you could or could not like Showgirls. You could or could not find it interesting or entertaining or whatever. But I think there's something fascinating about the way art, let's say a film like this, or just any kind of art, like a song or a TV show, or even just a simple painting, like how an audience and society can see it differently over time, in good ways or bad ways, right? And I think that's something that, yeah, you could kind of run this math on any sort of film that's been made, let's say over 30 years ago. Because so much has changed since then. Whether you're talking about racial dynamics or gender dynamics or all these sorts of things, that so much is different, and so much now is probably even unacceptable or inappropriate or whatever. And does that change the film and make it worse? Does it make it better in some way? I've talked about so many films here, and I've come down on both sides, depending on the film, I guess, because I think there is a part of it where it is about intention. Like if you are intending to make something that is aggressive or offensive, and you're intending to hurt or to, just run afoul, I could see that not really being a good, that's not going to stand the test of time. But if you're making it with the idea to question and to challenge and to provoke and hopefully maybe inspire some sort of thought or change or discussion or whatever, I could see that being something that still holds up. You gotta look at the right way, of course. The Showgirls was not a film that was trying to change the world, but this documentary at least shows us how the world has maybe changed around it. That was fascinating. I kind of feel like the documentary is better than the film, and in the end, so that might be worth a watch. If you are familiar with Showgirls, this might be kind of an interesting like addendum to it all. If you've never seen the film, I don't know. Do I recommend? Do I recommend you see it? Uh, I don't know. I don't know. That's going to be a personal decision, I guess. So the next documentary I saw here is this documentary called Faye. And this is from 2024, I believe. And this is about the actress Faye Dunaway. And there's a side to this that is about filmmaking and about films and about the history of films. But there's another side to this that is about this woman and her journey and her struggle with changing times and with aging. And, the way the two intersect, I think it's not on accident, right? We see her earlier days, earlier career, um, modeling, but then turning into acting and really kind of just taking off. I mean, whether it's Bonnie and Clyde or something like Thomas Crown Affair, like there are films that is at the late 60s where all of a sudden this is a person we just know, well, this is a person we're going to be watching. When we get to what is it? Mommy Dearest, a sort of biopic of Joan Crawford. Like that's where things get dicey because it kind of goes off the rails. And part of that, I think, is her performance, but I think it's also the filmmaking, some of the decisions that were made. And she doesn't come out looking so great in the end. And there's part of this documentary that goes into like the effect that had, but also the reasons why that's the way it ended up. Like she went so big with her performance because that's kind of what she thought she needed to do or what she was maybe told to do. And why is it that if a director tells a performer, specifically an actress, to do something that's not maybe flattering or going to be so well received, and it ends up not being that, right? It ends up being a disaster. Why is that the actor's fault? So, there should be the dynamic of being able to sort of refuse or to adjust. But I think this speaks to the state of things at the time or in that era of film and filmmaking, is that you do what's asked of you and you don't really question it. And if you do question it, then you become labeled as difficult or hard to work with. And I think that is what sort of followed Faye Dunaway. But I mean, from this documentary, it seems like it wasn't necessarily warranted, but it followed her throughout the rest of her career. I think the dynamic that is painted in this documentary, it is a little bit close to home. I feel like this is not quite as objective as I would have thought. She's in this, she's interviewed. I think her son is in the documentary, and he's interviewed, and he's there to provide some context of like, this is how it affected home life and that sort of thing. And I think it's an interesting way to look at this, to kind of get a peek into how, these things where somebody is putting themselves out there. And sometimes that can be really hard to handle, right? Like the reaction to it all, but also trying to maybe build a legacy or build an image and maintain it, right? And whether you look at it in terms of, oh, I really like the film she's been in and I like her performances in those. This is a good documentary to give you like the sort of running history of all that. But it is also a good look at that side of the business, that side of society that brings the double standards, right? That brings the judgment, that brings the sort of disrespect and the mistreatment. And I'll tell you this much: it's like Faye Dunaway, as a person, at least in this documentary, comes off as somebody who just isn't for that, just isn't going to play with that. So don't bring it. So the next ones I want to talk about here, these are just features, right? These are just films, but I think, in some ways or another, they kind of get at the same thing. We've got My Old Ass from 2024. And let's see, what else? I got The Substance, also from 2024, late in the year. And then Challengers from earlier in 2024. And these three films, they're very different stories. They've got very different characters and plots to them. But I think they're all kind of circling around this same thing of like how time can affect not just the way you behave, but also your perception of the world around you and the decisions you end up making. In My Old Ass, I think it's a film that, and on one hand, is trying to be a love story, but it's also trying to be a little bit of a coming of age, really kind of a fairy tale or a fable. And I say that because there's a little bit of magic happening in it. Going into the film, I didn't really understand what that magic was going to be. It's not quite like a body swap movie, like one of those where two characters end up in each other's bodies and they're kind of living the opposite person's life, right? Like we've seen a lot of those. And I kind of thought that's what this might be. Like just looking at the trailer, I'm like, wait, is this two characters switching bodies? And they're, kind of playing that whole trope through. It's not that at all. It's actually kind of different, and it's kind of smart in the way that it tries to play on that trope. But at the same time, like it's in terms of the mechanics of like the rules of how this works is not really clear either. And look, I know that's not the point of the film. It's not science fiction. It's not meant to be that. It is about this young girl and her encounter with her older self, and how having that sort of insight, that sort of experience from a later point in life informs what you see and what you do right now. Everybody at some point in life maybe wishes or wished that they could have been able to tell their younger self, like, hey, watch out for this or be ready for that. It's an interesting sort of fantastical element to this story, that we get this character who's dealing with her own sort of current day things, but is suddenly forced to like confront what the possible future might be and what decision she's going to have to make to get there, right? So I like that way of telling the story. I think I'm a little bit hung up on the sort of dynamic between the two characters because it feels like, in a way, it feels like we're seeing two different characters, right? In this film, we've got the young girl who is Elliot, and we've got the older version of herself, older Elliot, and that's Maisie Stella and Aubrey Plaza, right? So they are both playing this character at two different ages. And part of it works in terms of they feel like different people, but they're not different people. They're the same person, just at different ages, having gone through different things in life. And so I feel like it's enough of a distinction that, okay, well, they don't necessarily look alike and they don't necessarily behave the same. But I think that is part of everybody's journey in life is things change. You change. The world around you changes. So you're going to change the way you interact, even with yourself. And so this film, I think it tries to really illustrate it like out in the open. This is not like an internal sort of dilemma or a dialogue that's happening. It's like just, hey, what if you could talk to yourself and yourself was standing right next to you, right? So it's a fascinating sort of approach to this. It's entertaining. It's a comedy, of course, but it's got some dramatic things in it. And the one thing I would say is like I kind of saw the end, the sort of reveal to what happens to a couple of the characters. I kind of saw that coming pretty early on. I don't really know if there's any other way to do it that you could avoid kind of tipping that hand other than to just zag, right? And I really thought, oh, the film, it's leading me to know like this is going to happen, but watch, it's going to do something else, something totally different. And, part of that is probably just me, the viewer, kind of trying to get ahead of the film when I should probably back off and just let it be what it is. But other than that, I mean, I think it's at least given us a character that I feel like we haven't really seen a lot of, and in a situation that I don't think I've ever seen in a film before. I think it was pretty well done. This is from writer and director Megan Park, and it's interesting. It's a small film. It's set in a very kind of quiet part of the country. It's not really big and flashy, but I think it's still trying to tap into some bigger emotional and thematic elements. Now, the substance, on the other hand, wow. I got to say, this is a film that just really, really kind of blew me away. And it's not just because it's, oh, look, Demi Moore, she's kind of big and doing something really bold and outlandish in this film. That is all true. But it's also like it's taking this sort of same theme of dealing with age and dealing with experience and dealing with maybe some wasted opportunities and kind of seeing life in the rear view and what would be the outcome if you decided to take action on that somehow. And I think a lot of this film is played out as like metaphor, but I think it's addressing some very real kind of situations, some real emotional things. In this film, Demi Moore, she's like an aging celebrity, I guess, but she's it brought to mind like images of Jane Fonda when she used to do like the workout videos back in what was that, the 80s or whatever. And this film doesn't really live in a certain time period either. I feel like it's sort of in the past, but it's got a lot of modern and very current indicators that it's right now. So it's just such a strange kind of mix of so many things. But I think that's the idea, right? It's not reality. It's a version of reality, and it's sort of this mishmash of styles and ideas and time periods. But those things aren't what matters. What matters is this character and her struggle and her sort of attempt to get out of that struggle is to subscribe and take this sort of mysterious, kind of ominous looking, actually, substance and it's this program that she has to do this body swap thing, but it's not with an entirely different person. It's with a sort of clone of herself, but not a clone. And it's not really like it's not her. So it's a separate person that's born out of her, which is one of the most interesting and kind of disturbing segments of any film that I saw from last year is the whole like birthing scene. It's wild. And it's so like tactile and visceral and frightening, really. But I think it works to show like, if we're talking metaphor here, it's like someone who is taking such an extreme, such a desperate measure to combat this aging, this sort of dismissal of her ability and her talent and just her presence, even by creating another version of herself. And of course, the film plays out as like this other version of herself. This is Sue, played by Margaret Qualley, who is doing just as much work in this film. Like this character of Sue doesn't have as much sort of, I don't know, depth, but has so much like charisma and energy that it feels like an entirely different person on purpose, of course, but also it feels like, oh, wait, this would be a better substitute for Elizabeth that Demi Moore plays. This is a better version of her. Until we get, you play it out on a long enough timeline, then you start to see the problems. And I think that's what this film is trying to examine is, hey, look, you can do this thing and you can maybe feel like you found a solution, but the problem is it's going to catch up with you. And you could look at it as an external thing, right? This becomes an external thing you have to now fight back and try and like tamp down. But I think there's even another sort of way to look at this film, and the theme of it is that this is about a woman who is taking some very extreme measures and not even creating an external problem, but creating an internal problem. And the way I best kind of would illustrate it, or like an example of it, is, an aging celebrity that decides to get like plastic surgery, right? And get like things done to her body or face or whatever. And when you start to see like this person is kind of becoming unrecognizable and is kind of becoming monstrous looking, right? We've seen it. We've seen the pictures of people and things that people put themselves through and the changes that happen. And I think, this film goes way beyond the extreme. It really hits you over the head with like, okay, if you want to turn yourself into a beast in an effort to be younger or to be relevant, I mean, go ahead, but it's not going to end well. And to take that sort of theme, that sort of narrative, and put so much style and energy and craft, really. Yeah, that's the other thing about this film. I'm just watching a documentary on this a while ago before I started recording because, the filmmaker behind this is writer-director Coralie Fargia. This documentary is going into the actual like behind the scenes, the craft of making this film. And I didn't realize just how much of this, I mean, if you stop and you watch it, and I mean, just like examine it, like there's so much happening on a technical level in this film. Not only the like production in terms of sets and the cameras and the lighting and the use of color and music, but the makeup and special effects in this film are off the charts. I mean, there's so much happening in here. And, the great thing is like a lot of the marketing and the stuff that you might see, like trailers and stuff, it doesn't give you even a clue of what this film has in it. It is bonkers, but in a great way. So I've been really pleased. Just, it's kind of stuck with me, this film, in terms of the things that it's trying to do and say and how it goes about it. And so the last film I want to talk about here is Challengers. And this is the last, this is the last one of these that I saw. So I'm kind of talking about them in order. I know Challengers came out earlier in 2024, and just kind of held off on it because I didn't really, look, just to put it plainly, I don't really care about tennis. And I really thought, is this a tennis movie? Like, I'm not all that interested, you know? And I thought, well, all right, if I start to understand, like, maybe this is a film about this main character that Zendaya plays, Tashi, and she is a sort of a promising athlete, a tennis player who has an injury and then decides to kind of strike up this. It seemed like a love triangle, right, between these other two tennis players, Art and Patrick, and that's not what this film is. Like, I thought that's what it would be. It kind of seemed like the way it's at least talked about and promoted is like, well, Zendaya is the main character here, and this is going to be about her journey. And it's not. It's about the two guys. It's about Art and Patrick. And there's a real level of filmmaking that's going on here, just from a technical aspect, that you don't really see in a lot of films. Certainly not any films about tennis. I mean, it's a challenge to make, no pun, it's a challenge to make tennis interesting, I think, personally. And this film kind of does it. The problem is all these characters are just horrible. And I don't mean like the performances. I just mean the characters as written, as intended. They're horrible people. They're all kind of trying to one up each other and end up kind of betraying or backstabbing each other. And to what end? And so it's hard for me to kind of, I don't know, when I'm watching a film or a story and I don't find anybody that I really want to see come out in the end, like succeed, it's hard for me to stay engaged, you know? I maybe that's just me. You want to believe that someone here is going to, I don't know, do the right thing or be better than they could be or redeem themselves or something like that, right? And this film, none of these people do. All three of these characters are kind of angling on each other throughout the film. There's probably the intention that we're supposed to kind of feel for Patrick, who is the one who didn't find success. Because, you know, that's the other thing. This film takes these characters from a certain age through like 13 years later. And it starts when they're older, and then we jump back 13 years, and then we kind of spend the rest of the film hopping around in time to get to sort of the main tennis match that this whole film has been building to. And, you know, I even say that the way that this film jumps around in time, I felt like it was kind of unnecessary. Like, it didn't really make sense to me. It didn't seem like there was a real reason for doing it. I would understand if you want to hold something and don't reveal it until a certain point. That's kind of one of the main reasons you would like just do that, right? Like skip around in time is because, oh, you're not going to find this out until later because I don't want you to know it yet, even though it already happened. I understand that from a storytelling perspective, but it just bounces around so much and it doesn't always seem like there's a reason for it. Versus if you would have told this story chronologically, I think you might have still come out with the same result. You know, we might have still ended up feeling the same way and knowing the same things in a way that still worked. So I feel like this was a film that ultimately was trying to be a little too showy, a little too complex than it needed to be. And for characters that I don't really feel like there was no arc to them. Maybe if you would have told it in chronological order, it would have been more obvious. Like, oh, these people don't change. They are the same people throughout the entire film. Maybe this makes it feel like they do, but I don't think they do. In fact, I think they actually get worse, if that makes sense. So I guess if there's an arc, it's like, oh, you're watching these characters kind of devolve into scumbags. So I don't know. Maybe that's intentional. I don't know. I just know that eventually by the end of the film, I kind of came away like not really entertained and not really satisfied with it. I could appreciate some of the technical things that were happening, some of the craft involved, but Nah, it wasn't one for me, I guess. So anyway, that's some new films. If you want to hear some other episodes, you go to filmstreak.com. You can subscribe. You can get these new episodes by email. I've got the list on IMDb, so you can check those out. Find that almost 600 films we're going on now. You can find them all in a list there. Add them to your list or rate them or whatever you want to do there. I mentioned it last episode, I think, but some of the earliest episodes of Film Streak, I'm going to kind of take them offline, and we're going to move them into a different place where they can still be available, but it's just going to be a little bit different. It's not going to be on the feed anymore. So if you're seeing that already, just know that, hey, they didn't go missing, but I'll kind of give you more details. I thought about Patreon. I think I said that in the last episode. I don't know. Maybe we'll still do that. I'm working some of that out. But in the meantime, filmstreak.com is where you can find most of the episodes for now. So anyway, that's it. I'm going to go out here. It's cold outside, but stay warm and go watch something new.